Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about some goals I have for my reading, the channel, and just some general life stuff outside of BookTube. Let's go ahead and get started with some goals related to my novel reading. And the first thing is I want to read 45 books this year. Now this would be close to 20 books less than what I read last year, but I want to still read about 20,000 pages. That would be about 3,000 less pages than I did last year. But this year I have some very, very long books planned, and I think those will just take up a lot more of my time than I did last year. Last year I read a lot of short stuff, some of that being the James Bond novels, a lot of short stories and novellas from Brandon Sanderson, and a lot of short novellas that take place in the Expanse universe. So between those kind of pumped up my numbers a little bit artificially, and I don't think I'll have that same thing happen this year. I do like to read, a wide range of novels, and the length of them doesn't really matter too much to me, but I think this year I can expect that number to come down, but the page count to stay about the same. Of those 45 books, I want just one of them to be a nonfiction book. I don't think I have read a nonfiction book since maybe it was either 2020 or 2021. I don't read a lot of nonfiction. Normally when I'm reading, I want to just kind of escape the real world, don't want to, deal with anything from it. But I think there's definitely a value to nonfiction reading. I think the last nonfiction I read was called What If by Randall Moore, and it was kind of a fun look at scientific problems that people sent him via email and all kinds of things, and kind of went through from real logical like scientific answers to like crazy out of this world, like what if a bowling ball traveled the speed of light, something like that. I don't have a real example from the book right now, but I had a lot of fun with that. I think there's actually a second one, so that might be the one I keep my eye on as my one nonfiction book. But I just think in general, there's probably a lot of good nonfiction out there. There's probably a lot of really good stories from real life people that I am interested in that I could read. So that is a goal, just one. I think even that might be a stretch because it's just not something I reach for a whole lot. But, I think having this out there and kind of pushing myself to do it, maybe it's something I can just try to knock out really early in the year, and then that way it's done, and maybe I can read more than one. That would be great too. I want to make a concerted effort this year to try to read a little bit more outside of the United States and the UK. I think obviously as a English speaker, most of the books I read come from English speaking countries. That doesn't have to be the case. There are plenty of great books out there that have been translated from other languages. My favorite series and book of all time is from China, The Three Body Problem. That series, if it wasn't for me coming out of just looking at things from English writers, it's something I would have never have read. So that's something I want to make sure I do. Last year, I didn't get to do that. The year before, I think I did a pretty decent job of mixing it up with non-native English writers. Last year, my year was just so dominated by Brandon Sanderson that actually a lot of goals I have this year are because of that, and I just want to make sure I am not neglecting amazing stories that take place and come from completely different cultures. I think that is one of the best things about the indie writing scene, is that voices that never would get published in a traditional sense have the ability to be published or self-published and read by people that don't need to go through a publishing house, that don't need to have some crazy wide appeal, that need to be mass marketed to everybody. And yeah, I think that is something I want to do. I think it's really easy to just kind of stay in your little Western bubble and not explore things from outside of, what you're used to reading. So I would implore you to also look at other countries. I know there are people who try to read a book from every country, and I think that's really cool and something I kind of want to do as well. And here are some more general goals. In genres, I would definitely like to read more sci-fi this year. I have found that in general, I read a lot more fantasy than I do sci-fi. And I like a lot of fantasy, but I love a lot of sci-fi. There's something about sci-fi where I don't read it as much for whatever reason, but when I do, I seem to really love it. So I think it would be a good idea for me to read more of that genre. There is a lot of really great classic and modern sci-fi out there that I have not read that I want to, and that sounds amazing. So I'm going to push to make, of that 45, I'd like to be closer to like 15 or 20 of that, maybe towards sci-fi. That feels heavy knowing some of the plans that I have for reading, but I do want to make sure, and maybe the best way to handle that will be reading some of the shorter sci-fi books out there that I can, but definitely want to push a little more sci-fi. And I kind of mentioned, classic sci-fi. Well, in general, I would like to read some more classics. Classics are something that I loved for a really long time. When I first got back into reading, that was like the first thing I read. I read a lot of classics and I loved so many of them. And last year, the most classic thing I read, which I don't think most people would really consider these as classics because they came out in like the 1950s, the earliest ones of them are the James Bond books. So, I think the earliest one of those came out that I read last year in like 1950 something. So I think some people would count that as classic, but there is like some real hardcore classics stuff that I would like to read. Some Charles Dickens, I think I would definitely like to get back to. He's always been one of my favorite authors. Obviously, I read A Christmas Carol by him for Christmas this past year again, but outside of that, classics have really fallen to the wayside for me, but I definitely want to pick at least a couple of those up this year as well. And I hinted at this goal a little bit already when I mentioned Brandon Sanderson, but last year I read 30 Brandon Sanderson novels, and I read like 68 books. So almost half of my reading was from Brandon Sanderson. And so this year I want to make sure I read more authors. Not that I regret reading all of that Sanderson. It was great. I had a fantastic time catching up with the Cosmere, but I really do think it would be nice to read a wider variety of authors. And I can already see myself doing this year. Is there are like a handful of series that I really want to read. And if I really like them, I can see myself subjecting myself to reading like 4 or 5 different authors and not really getting a big mix of authors. And they don't even necessarily have to be new. They can be authors I have read before, but I would really like to have a wide variety of authors. I would really like to look back at the end of 2024 and be like, wow, I read 45 books and 28 of them are from different authors. And it's not just a bunch of, wow, Sanderson is 50 or 60% of my top 10 and like 45% of my top 50, you know what I mean? So being able to get a more wide variety of authors is something I want to do. Another thing is I want to use the library more. I am a kind of a Audible hardcore person. I did start to use Hoopla this past year, which was great. Using that resource so I'm not always spending money and like using credits and having a subscription and everything with Audible. I love Audible. It's great. It does, open the door. There's so many books that are only on Audible, which is a whole different issue we could talk about. But leveraging the library, getting ebooks and audiobooks through the library where I'm not having to spend money on something sounds really great. And it's something I want to do more. And I think everybody should do more. The library really is a fantastic resource for books. And so I'm going to definitely try and use those, especially outside of series that I'm reading. So like in 2024, I know I want to read Malazan. That'll probably be my Audible credit every month, is to pick up those Malazan books. But outside of that, it would be great to just use the library and not have to spend money, and really just use Audible for sales, because when they do have a sale, some of those sales are just fantastic and you can get books that you can't get other places. But outside of that, most of the books I read are fairly popular. It's not like I'm trying to find some real hidden gem that most libraries won't have. So being able to use the library and use extensions of the library like Hoopla, Libby, those kinds of things, great. And I'm definitely going to try to do that more in 2024. And my last more novel-oriented goal is to do better with my Goodreads. So right now, and I have a lot of thoughts on Goodreads. Part of me wants to change how I use Goodreads completely, but first and foremost, I want to be better about writing at least a simple review. I don't think just plopping a random star rating onto a book really helps. I really would at least like to come in and say, this is what I liked about the book, this is what I didn't like about the book, and be done with it. It doesn't need to be a Petriclio style, super in-depth, awesome review. He does a great job with that, but that's not something I really want to do. But I think giving a little bit of context behind a star rating would be good, and I have completely fallen off. I probably haven't really, rated or written a review for a book I have given a star rating to in the past 30 or so books I've done. So maybe go back in my backlog. I do take notes for what I read, so I can probably just transfer those straight over into Goodreads, but I do want to be better about that. And give me your opinion on this one thing. Something I've thought about doing with Goodreads is, because my rating scale seems to differ so much from other people's, mine's a lot harder. Like when I give a book a 3-star rating, that still means it's a good book and I liked it. I think for a lot of people, a 3-star is like, this isn't a good book. And so I've thought about adjusting how I use the ratings on Goodreads and basically just go in and give every book I read a 5-star from now on. And inside of my actual review is to give it a real ranking. So no matter what, I'm not going to be hurting any author. And obviously this matters more for self-published authors than it does for somebody like Brandon Sanderson. But because Goodreads can be so superficial, just give everything I read a 5-star, and in my actual review say, this is a 3 out of 5 for me because of this, and kind of explain that, hey, my rating system is just does not fit with what most people use, and I don't want to disproportionately hurt a book with not a huge number of reviews, especially because I do give a lot of 3 stars, because I think that's where most books fit. For me, it's a bell curve. Most books are like a slight uptick from 3-star. They're in that 3 and 4-star range. No, most books are not a 5-star, and most books are not a 1-star. But I can just tell when I go and look at books that is not how most people use these. Most people just, like I said, if it's even a decent book to them, they're giving it a 4 or 5-star rating. And I don't know, it's just a thought I have. Let me know what you think. I'm kind of rambling on this last point just because I have a lot of thoughts about it because I do think that indie and self-published authors deserve the same level of criticism that published authors get, because the work that they put out is just as valid and at most point in times just as good as published works. So a lot of ideas floating around there, but let me know your thoughts in the comments on how maybe I should handle rating on Goodreads. Now, moving on, I have really just one manga goal for this year, and that is to get back to reading it. For really the last half, maybe even a little bit more of 2023, I just completely dropped reading manga. It's something in general that I really do have to just be in the mood for. And unfortunately, I was not in the mood to read a whole lot of it in 2023, and I want to get back into it. There are stories that I love. Some of my favorite stories have been from manga, like Berserk, for example, is one of the best things I have ever read. And the fact that I haven't been keeping up with it, even though there are chapters out, is a little sad to me, and I would like to get back to it. I do have an idea that is kind of bouncing around in my head for kind of a long running series I could do with manga, but I'm not sure if I'll do it. I don't know if I have the ability to do it the way I want to right now, but it's an idea I have, and I think if I do that, it would push me to read manga a little bit more, but it is definitely just something I want to get back into, and so that is my one single manga goal. I don't have an amount I want to read, but I would like to get back to the point where I am somewhat regularly reading manga. Now let's move over to some channel goals, and I don't have a whole lot of there either. This is really a hobby for me. I really enjoy doing it. I like being a part of the community and talking with people, getting people's opinions on books and just talking about books in general. And with that being said, I want to make sure I keep doing reviews. I think most people who pay attention to this space know that reviews are, in general, the worst performing videos you can do for your channel. And because this is a hobby, and I don't really care if they don't do all that well. Does it suck a little bit? Yeah, because you're putting in work and you want people to watch this thing that you're putting effort into. But in the long run, I just want to talk about books that I'm reading. Part of this channel is that, I made this for me so that I could have a log of the books I read. That's why I review basically everything I read. And I don't want to stop doing reviews, even though they don't do well for the channel. I will say I do want to be better at doing reviews. One thing I've noticed is I'm so cautious when it comes to spoilers that I think sometimes it hurts my ability to properly review and talk about a book, because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. And I think I need to maybe relax that just a little bit. Not to the point where I'm spoiling major plot points or anything, but there are points where I'm afraid to mention a character's name because I feel like it could be seen as a spoiler. And I think I maybe need to relax that and kind of look at anything that happens, like a third of the way into the book. Is that really a spoiler, or is that really just kind of help setting the stage for the book? So I think I need to work on that. And in general, most of my reviews have been, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And I think I maybe want to change that to more of a, this is why you should read it and maybe why you shouldn't. Kind of frame it more like that, and then just a straight up, this is what I like and why, and be like, for it to be more of a, hey, this is what I think it does really well and what it doesn't do well and why you might like it and why you might not like it. I think that might be a better way to do it, but I don't really have my exact plan yet on how I want to change how I do reviews. So let me know if you have any thoughts on that as well down in the comments. My only other two real goals really for the channel itself is maybe change my lighting. I don't love the way it looks. I don't think it looks bad, but I don't really love it. And I will say, get a different microphone. I really don't enjoy using this mic. It can be a little testy sometimes. So if you have any good recommendations for a mic, let me know. I definitely would look into it. Like I said, this is a hobby, so I don't want to spend like $700 on like top tier audio quality stuff. But this mic annoys me sometimes, especially clipping it on my shirt, and sometimes it flops all over the place. And sometimes you record a whole video because it rubs up against your shirt the entire time and you don't realize it until you go back and check. So maybe something that doesn't maybe directly attach to me would be great. And then I just wanted to drop in some outside of BookTube things that I kind of want to work on for this year. And the first and foremost of that is I want to spend less time on my phone. I don't think this is probably crazy. I think a lot of people probably have this goal, but I looked at my screen time and it was like kind of shocking how much time I'm just wasting on my phone. And I told myself, if I spent the time I waste on my phone looking at junk and absolutely nothing, and just replace that with reading or reading manga, that'd be great. That would be a much more beneficial use of my time and probably more enjoyable in the long run. So that is definitely one thing I want to do. And the one other thing that is really on the top of my head is I would like to compete in a strongman competition this year. I already am looking at one and have kind of started training for it. I've never done strongman. I've always been more of a powerlifter kind of person, but I think it would be really fun. I think strongman is a little bit more athletic and kind of suits my strengths in that kind of field more than just straight up powerlifting. And so like I said, I've slowly started to train for one. I'm thinking about doing it. I currently have a bicep injury that I'm trying to work on, and that's kind of hindering me a little bit. And I kind of told myself, if I can get my bicep to 100% in time for this competition, I will do it. And with that being said, I would also like to do a powerlifting competition this year as well. It has been over 10 years since I've competed in powerlifting, and I think it's time to go back out onto the platform and do a competition just for fun. Obviously, I'm not trying to do anything too crazy. My lifts are, pedestrian when you look at high level guys, but I think it would still be a lot of fun and something that I train for all the time. I did kind of stop powerlifting training and did more bodybuilding stuff, but I have always been a big fan of lifting. It is really my biggest passion in life, even more than reading and stuff. So that is kind of some goals I have for that as well. But let me know any goals you have for reading, your life, anything in general. And as always, have a good one.